Hello again. Welcome back. I'm Sherry Marks. I'm the pastor of the Church of the Open Door in Ukiah, California. And this is my message and my mini service for this week, since we are not meeting in person again at the moment due to the COVID sweeping across Northern California here. So we do what we can do when we can't be in church altogether. Holy One, be with us today, and let my words be your words. Let our hearing be what you want us to hear and learn. Amen. The message comes from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 2, the very end of chapter 2. When the Magi had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." My message last week, if you recall, dealt with the visit of the three Magi, sometimes called the three kings, who followed a star to Bethlehem to honor the newly born King of the Jews. I mentioned then that there was not enough space in any one Sunday for this entire story, and because it's a very complex story with a lot of different angles coming in from all over. One day was all the lectionaries give us, however, and then we jump straight into the adult Jesus beginning his ministry on the banks of the Jordan River. Well, we're in Cycle C, and we'll be reading from Matthew's Gospel this year. But I'm not finished with the infancy story, as Matthew tells it. There's a bit more of the story than just the three Magi coming. So I'm basically ignoring the lectionary this week and continuing this last bit of the Epiphany story. It's a small piece of a story concerning what happened after the Magi left for home. The information we have for this time in the young Jesus' life is scanty at best, and that's probably putting it kindly, and it's largely anecdotal. I've never taken the time to parse it all out and try to establish a coherent storyline, a why and a when and a where. Perhaps you're as curious as I am. That's what I'm going to do this week, or at least try. If you recall from last week, Herod, the frightened and jealous Roman-appointed king, wanted to get his hands on this new king of the Jews, and not, I'm afraid, to honor him. So once the Magi left, Joseph was told in a dream to pack up Mary and Jesus and go to Egypt out of Herod's reach, which he did in the middle of the night. So before we get any further in this backstory, there's some background information that's really needed here. There's a lot of it, several hundred years of it, and it's complicated, so I'm going to try and keep it just as short as I can. The first question is, why Egypt? Wasn't Egypt always the enemy to the Hebrew people? The bad guys of the Exodus story? Well, yes and no. In the Exodus story, they were definitely the bad guys, but the Exodus took place anywhere between 1200 and 1500 years before the birth of Jesus, and much had changed over those long years. The Egyptian dynasties had changed over the centuries, but one other important feature was that the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar had laid siege to Jerusalem, destroying the city and the temple in the process. Now this took place about 600 years before Jesus. And as a result, there was a great dispersal of the Jewish population, of which a large segment ended up settling in a now open and more accessible Egypt. There was a further major shuffling in the Near Eastern political scene around 300 years later than that, with the world-conquering tour of Alexander the Great, who brought the Greeks into the region. Followed a couple of hundred more years later by the appearance of the Romans, in the Shakespeare-famous persons of Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, and Cleopatra, which led to the eventual annexation of Egypt as a part of the Roman Empire. A lot had changed since the days of Moses. The current Romans of Egypt were not likely to be at all interested in the drama centering around a minor vassal king in Judea. In short, the Egypt of the time of our story today was not the Egypt of the Exodus, and the Jewish community there was not a group of maltreated slaves. It was actually a logical place for Joseph to take his family for relative safety. Egypt, recognizing a good tourist idea when they hear one, currently apparently has at least 24 or more sites which purport to be the place where Joseph, Mary, and Jesus stayed while in Egypt. Whichever might be the real site, if any, they stayed there for something like 3 years until word came that Herod had died, at which time they set out to return home. But that didn't turn out to be quite as simple as it should have been. As we're told a little further down in Matthew, Joseph took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in the place of Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town named Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. Archelaus was one of Herod's sons and just as unpleasant as his father. He would later be actually deposed by the Romans because the Jews there hated him so very much. So Joseph didn't settle anywhere near the seat of Roman power in Jerusalem, but traveled on to Nazareth, well to the north in the area of Galilee, roughly 80 miles or so from Jerusalem. And there Jesus was raised. And here, Matthew ends the infancy, childhood stories of Jesus. This part of the story, the whole journey to Egypt, is found only in Matthew, nowhere else. Luke, which is the only other gospel with any childhood mentions, tells us that at 8 days old, Jesus was taken into Jerusalem to the temple to be circumcised, and that his family went back every year for Passover. Later, Luke has the story of Jesus as a young boy, probably somewhere around 12 years old, returning to the temple to discourse with the elders. That's it. Everywhere else, the story of Jesus begins when he wandered out of Nazareth down into the desert reaches where a wild man named John was baptizing people. Now, in the centuries leading up to Jesus' time, it was common practice for men who became great leaders or kings to have semi-mythical birth stories attached to them. The mother of Alexander the Great, for instance, always insisted that he was the child of a god, conceived when she was serving a required time in the temple sanctuary. Even King David's story begins when he was just a boy, but the youngest and smallest of his siblings, who did the unheard of deed of killing off the giant warrior Goliath. So, did these things actually happen to Jesus, or was Matthew just seeking to make him seem like more kingly material? Who knows? And does it really matter? The story is interesting, but all in all, it tells us very little about Jesus, the person, or about his mission here among us. He was just a baby and toddler at the time. The most important thing that this story from Matthew does teach us is how the people of Matthew's time viewed Jesus. Not just as a teacher, not just a wandering preacher, but as a great king, and not just a simple country boy from Nazareth. As someone to be associated with the messianic prophecies from the Hebrew Scriptures. Matthew's story makes that very clear. We begin to learn more about this Jesus with the stories that come next. And the next 3 years he lived and walked among us as one who came from God. We'll dig into these mission-oriented stories, these mission-beginning stories, in the weeks left between now and the beginning of Lent. So stick with us here and journey with us as we learn about the early days of Jesus interacting with us on this earth. And before we move into communion, which we will be doing here in a moment, I have 2 things I want to stick in here. The first is the fact that Monday is Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday, this honoring him and all that he has meant in our country. And I'd just like to stick in a prayer here for a moment for him and in thanksgiving. So, Holy One, we thank you for sending us those like Dr. King, your prophets who teach us and show us your truth. Those who throughout the centuries have worked their whole lives for justice for all of your children. The ones who stand for the powerless and who speak for the voiceless. Those who speak with your voice and stand before power and demand justice from an unjust world. Continue to give us ears to hear them and to join them and to give ourselves to building your reign here on this earth, in this place, in this time. Thank you for the prophets that you give us, Lord, still. Amen. Now, as long as we are not able to gather together in person, I will be conducting a brief communion service here. If you would like to take part with us in this, I forgot to mention this last week, which I apologize. You can put us on pause for a minute and go get a piece of bread, a cracker, something that you can use for communion, something to drink for the cup, and then come back and join us. We'll be here. The last night that Jesus would spend with this people in his human form on this earth, he gathered them all together to celebrate the preparation for the Passover. And at that meal, there were certain words that he spoke, certain actions that he took, which were directed not only to those there with him in the room, but spoken to us down through the centuries as well. and we claim them as spoken to us and for us. Because when he was acting as host at the table, he took the bread that would be passed around for everyone to share. He picked up a piece of the bread and he raised it up and he offered it to the one he called Father, and he blessed it and he said, "This bread is my body, broken as my body will be broken. Broken so that all may partake. So take this bread and break it and share it among you, and then eat it and remember that I am always with you." And then he took the cup and he said, "This cup is the cup of the new and the everlasting covenant, which cannot be broken, because this cup is my blood, which seals the promise, seals the covenant between God and God's people, that they will never be left alone, ever. That God is always with us, that I am always with you." So take the cup and drink from it, and remember who I am, and remember whose you are. Remember. And so we come together, whenever we're together as a people, we come and we break the bread and we drink the cup, and we remember that we belong to Jesus, who is part of us, within us, part of our very molecular structure, once we eat this bread and drink from this cup, and always. So please join me now, if you are prepared. Holy One, we eat this bread and we drink from this cup as a sign that we believe, as a sign that we welcome you, as a sign that we unite ourselves with you. Thank you for being in and with us always. And thank you for joining us here today for this word and for this sharing. Take what you've learned here, what you've heard, what you've shared at the table here, and go out into the world and share it with all around you. And may your week be truly blessed. Amen.
Founded on love, welcome and hope, with a church of the open door. You are welcome here. We invite you in to share the bread, to share